A high-pitched beep shattered the pre-dawn calm as the biometric scanner illuminated the ID console in stark white light. Guards froze mid-stride, rifles trained on the lone figure in olive fatigues, her slender silhouette outlined against the warehouse's bay doors. In that heartbeat, she knew they'd misjudged her again. Lieutenant Mara Sinclair stood motionless, fingertips resting lightly on the chipped metal of her issued pup tent. Her heart thundered in her ears, but her expression held only quiet resolve. Around her, hardened men and women in tactical gear exchanged puzzled glances. They saw a trainee, another visitor, tagged with a plastic pass and a curled lip in the corner. They couldn't have been more wrong. Cold open hook complete. 34 words, she inhaled, tasting the acrid scent of diesel and ozone. Memories flickered, her father's calm voice guiding her steady breath during sniper drills at dawn. Her mother's skilled hands stitching field wounds under a flickering lamp-all woven into her bones, although never uttered aloud here. Drop. If you've ever felt underestimated. Every day at Unit Zero's clandestine compound, she had scrubbed floors, calibrated satellite uplinks, and patched neighbors' training wounds. Her cover badge proclaimed visitor. Her clearances whispered secrets no public record could trace. No one asked questions until the night warnings blared. A ruptured gas line in the east wing, an explosion echoing through reinforced blast. Walls, alarms pulsed red, shattering complacency. Men shouted over comms, evac routes blocked, backup hours away. Panic was a deadly liability. Mara's gaze snapped to the fractured corridor behind her. Thick smoke curled through grated vents, heat streaking paints from overhead panels. She jogged forward, fingers dancing over her belt's pouch's oxygen mask, pulse ox scanner, micro-weld torch. She slid past the nearest guard, who flinched as she sealed his vest's buckles with the precision of a field medic. Within seconds, she was amidst the chaos. 2 soldiers pinned beneath debris, another clutching a gas leak with trembling gloves. Mara knelt, eyes cool and professional. One soldier coughed, blood staining his cheek. She steadied his head, sliding the mask over his mouth. "Breathe slow," she murmured. Her voice was a scalpel calm, precise. He obeyed, panic retreating under her steady gaze. She glanced up at the weld-glow embers in the ceiling. Without hesitation, Mara ignited the micro-weld torch, carving a sliver of escape through warped steel. Sparks danced like fallen stars at another guard, barked, "What the hell, who authorized this?" Mara didn't pause. She guided the soldier to the jagged opening, coaxing him through and lifting him to safety. 3 lives saved before any senior officer arrived. If you've ever surprised someone by doing their job. She stood at the entrance, gasping in cool night air, soot smudged across her cheekbone. Her visitor pass lay crumpled in her palm. A lieutenant's silhouette loomed behind the evac lights. "Who are you?" the voice demanded. Mara's lips curved in a composed half-smile as she held the pass in front of her. They scanned the code. Seconds passed like hours. Then the screen flashed in bold red letters. Founder Unit Zero. Every gun lowered. Every eye widened. The legend they thought was myth had just walked through their breach. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." Smoke drifted lazily into the dawn as the last ambulance roared out of the compound gates. Mara Sinclair stood at the threshold of the ruined corridor, boots scuffed, visitor badge now tucked deep in her cargo pocket, irrelevant, a relic of the cover she'd just torched beyond recognition. The surviving trainees huddled by the emergency lights, whispers threading between them like an electric hum. They didn't know what to do with her, now this slight, soot-smeared woman who'd crawled through fire and steel as if she owned the place. Because she did. An older man in a faded black uniform emerged from the haze. Major Robert Killian, operations overseer, the closest thing Unit Zero had to a chain of command these days. Deep lines carved his forehead. The heavy sidearm strapped to his chest looked redundant next to the storm in his eyes. Mara. His voice cracked slightly, shock and something like respect flickering in equal measure. That was a hell of a stunt. She offered a dry half-smile, brushing a lock of soot-clumped hair behind her ear. Wasn't a stunt, just patchwork. Behind them, engineers scrambled to weld temporary braces into the compromised corridor. Her eyes drifted to the evac tents popping up across the old training yard cots lined in neat rows. Young men and women hooked up to IV. Their whispers following her like moths to flame. Drop. If you've ever had to prove you're more than your label. She felt the gravity shifting already, how every gesture, every word might fracture the fragile command structure here. Because no matter what her badge had said a minute ago, they'd grown used to seeing her as a ghost, a myth, a story you whispered about after lights out. They'd never seen her wield authority up close. She'd hoped they never would. Killian stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. They think you're here to take over. I'm not, she said evenly, eyes flicking to a young recruit trying to hide a burn under his sleeve. She stepped forward and pressed a small burn gel into his palm. He stammered a thank you, but she'd already moved on. Killian rubbed his temples. Mara, they scanned you. It's in the system now. Command will come sniffing around before sunrise. If you want to keep this place stable, you need to tell them something. Anything. Mara glanced back at the crumpled visitor badge in her pocket. Her mind flickered to her father's long-ago words. The quiet ones survive the longest. The quiet ones have the best aim. But sometimes silence was the quickest way to bleed out. Rally them, she murmured, before they invent their own stories. She strode into the makeshift triage bay. Eyes snapped to her. The burned, the bruised, the ones who had crawled behind her as she cut escape tunnels in warped steel. She didn't bother climbing a crate or asking for a mic. She just stood at the center of their ruined perimeter, boots sunk in soot, chin lifted. You saw what this place does when the lights flicker, she began. Her voice was steady, carrying through the yard's fractured acoustics. You saw how fast help doesn't come, so you help each other. A medic shifted uneasily by the fore rack. A sniper in a battered ghillie jacket leaned in, his eyes wary but locked on hers. This facility wasn't built for tourists, she said. Unit Zero was never meant to be pretty, or safe, or easy. You knew that when you signed the non-disclosure. When you stepped through that gate. Murmurs flared, a few eyes dropping to the dusty ground. But they listened. She let her breath settle, conjuring the lessons drilled into her by people whose graves were scattered across forgotten hills. She'd been forged by their silence, their whispers, their midnight corrections when her hand slipped on a scope or her wrist trembled at a suture line. You want to survive the next breach? She asked, soft enough that they had to lean in. You start now. Or you walk out that gate tomorrow morning. No one moved, a single cough. The flap of a medic's glove against a metal cart. Nothing else. Droppa. If you've ever stepped up when no one else would. She gave Killian the faintest nod. He took the cue, barking orders to the remaining squad. Leaders setting up fire watch rotations and backup oxygen lines. Within minutes, the yard shifted from an overwhelmed triage to an organized rescue op. They'd be ready if the gas line ruptured again. When the worst was patched and the sun cracked the edge of the compound walls, Mara sat on the broken concrete steps of what used to be the visitor barracks. She checked the pulse ox on her finger. More out of habit than need. Heart rate steady. Oxygen good. Killian joined her, slumping against the railing. What now, Founder? She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the word Founder settle into her ribs. It didn't feel like power. It felt like a debt coming due. Now we wait for command, she said. And when command came, 3 black SUVs humming through the battered gates, they brought more than questions. They brought the first test of who she really was and whether Unit 0 still had teeth. She stood, brushing off her pants, and watched the dark-suited men step out. Her visitor pass burned hot in her pocket. She knew this was the beginning of the breach that would split everything open: her secrecy, their trust, the fragile peace they'd built on a compound full of ghosts. And she would not flinch first. Before the next word passed her lips, the lead agent lifted his scanner and pointed it straight at her chest. The agent's scanner blinked once, an accusing red dot glowing over the faded patch on Mara's chest. She didn't move. Didn't so much as breathe shallow. The compound gates groaned shut behind the 3 black SUVs, trapping the morning sun in fractured beams that cut across the cracked asphalt. Soldiers, trainees, and field medics hovered near the blast-warped corridor, all trying to look busy while their eyes stayed locked on the standoff. Major Killian stepped up to her flank, one hand hovering just above the butt of his sidearm. The gesture was pointless. If these suits were here to neutralize her, he'd be ash and bone before he cleared the holster. "State your business," Mara said, her voice low but carrying across the compound yard. It sounded like her father's command voice. "Strange how the dead never truly left you." The lead agent, a sharp-jawed man in an unmarked tactical jacket, flicked the scanner to life again. Its pulse flickered over her biometric tag, then bounced to her iris. He made a show of studying the readout. "Founder Sinclair," he drawled. "That what we call you these days?" She caught the slight edge in his tone, a man accustomed to being the final authority, unused to facing the ghost in the stories. "I didn't call myself that," Mara said evenly. "Your scanner did." A ripple of uneasy laughter stirred behind her. Trainees pressed closer to each other, suddenly hyper-aware of every whispered rumor they'd traded about the so-called founder. A woman with a visitor pass who could stitch a man's chest cavity shut one moment and cut a security gate's power the next. A myth until now. The agent's eyes narrowed. He gestured at Killian. "This facility's been off-grid for 3 years. Command wants to know how an entire disaster response unit turned ghost town, yet somehow survived under the radar." Killian's lips tightened. He glanced at Mara but said nothing. She stepped forward, boots scraping the asphalt. "You'll get answers," she said, "but not standing here. My people need to know this won't turn into a siege." She could sense the trainees behind her, half of them clutching scavenged gear, half not even sure which chain of command to follow anymore. If this dissolved into panic, the facility's fragile spine would snap. The agent's scanner beeped twice, and the handheld terminal displayed a flickering biometric log. It confirmed what she already knew: her fingerprints, her retinal signature, her unique code string woven through Unit 0's original charter. If Command wanted her gone, they'd have to burn the original charter too. "Follow me," she said, not waiting for permission. She turned on her heel, striding back through the main corridor, her corridor now. Whether they liked it or not. Drop a "if you've ever had to prove you still belong where you built something." The corridor smelled like scorched plastic and welding fumes. Engineers had worked through the dawn, reinforcing structural beams, patching exposed wiring. Mara's eyes flicked to every corner, mapping vulnerabilities. Once, long ago, she'd helped draw these blueprints on a battered drafting table with her mother's coffee mug sweating rings across the paper. She caught herself tracing those phantom lines in her mind as she led the suits into the command room. It looked more like a bunker than an office, reinforced steel walls, an old holographic ops table flickering in and out of focus. She snapped her fingers at a young tech perched on a folding chair. "Status?" The tech swallowed, eyes darting from her to the suits. "Backups coming online. Comms grid at 50%. Still no uplink to the central satnet. We're flying dark." "Keep it that way," she said. The tech blinked, but not a dot. One of the agents, shorter, heavyset, sweat pooling around his collar, huffed out an incredulous laugh. "You think you can dictate uplinks to Command?" Mara fixed him with a look so flat, the man's mouth snapped shut. "You're in my house now," she said. "You'll sit, you'll listen. And you'll remember that this place stands because no one outside these walls thought we were worth saving." The suits exchanged glances, but for the moment, they did as they were told. They took up positions around the flickering ops table, scrolling through tactical reports and after-action logs. Every screen they touched told the same story. The gas explosion, the breach, the evacuer fingerprints at every point. Drop 'em if you've ever had to prove your legacy wasn't just ink on paper. Killian lingered by the doorway, arms folded, his eyes never leaving hers. He knew, as well as she did, that this was the test. Command would press, probe, threaten. If she faltered now, the trainees would scatter. The compound would be stripped for parts. The lead agent leaned forward. "Here's how this goes, Founder. You tell us what you've really been building here. The budget black hole we buried 3 years ago? You want to convince us you didn't turn Unit Zero into your private militia. Now's your chance." Mara's lip twitched. "Private militia? You think I'd hide behind walls if I wanted an army?" She stabbed a finger at the wall-mounted screen behind him. It displayed real-time drone footage of the surrounding desert-cracked earth, distant ridges, no approaching convoys, no reinforcements coming for either side. "Look out there," she said. "Nothing, that's what we've got. What you left us with. And you want to know what I've been building? Fine, I've been building competence. People who can respond when your bureaucracy forgets them. When disaster strikes and there's no one else." Her voice stayed soft, but it struck the concrete. "Walls like a hammer. I built what you abandoned." The agent's eyes flickered. Something like uncertainty bled through his professional calm. And why keep it off book? She exhaled, thinking of the last emergency call they'd ignored. The orphaned oil rig that went up in flames when no official rescue teams would get within 100 miles. She'd led the silent convoy that night. Brought home 12 who would have burned in their bunks. "You know why," she said. "You'd have buried us in procedure, and people would have died." Again, Killian's voice finally rumbled from the doorway. "And they'll keep dying if you cut us out now." The suits shifted uncomfortably, sensing the truth in the air. They'd come to squash a ghost unit. Now they'd found a living, breathing organism that wouldn't die quietly. Mara leaned both hands on the flickering ops table. Her eyes bored into the lead agents. "You want to decommission Unit Zero?" She said. "Fine, but look these people in the eye first. Tell them you're done with them. Then step outside and see how many more fire lines you can hold when the next breach comes." Silence hung so thick it seemed to choke the dusty air. The agent's jaw twitched. He didn't answer. He didn't have to, because in that silence, Mara knew she'd just pulled them back from the edge, barely. The suits would write their reports. They'd threaten oversight, audits, budget reviews. But Unit Zero would stand for now. But she also knew the next test wouldn't come on black SUVs and polished boots. It would come from inside whispers, fear, betrayal. And when it came, she'd have to prove she could still lead the unit she built from nothing. And that test would start at dusk, when the perimeter alarms howled again. This time, it wouldn't be a gas leak. It would be someone inside the fence, someone who wanted the Founder dead. The alarm pierced the early dusk like a blade drawn across bone. A shriek of klaxons rattled the compound's corrugated fences as the sun dipped behind the last desert ridge, smearing the sky with bruised gold and copper. Mara Sinclair felt the cold prickle of sweat at her nape even before the first radio crackled. "All units, code black intruder inside the fence. Repeat, we have a hostile inside the wire." She was already moving before Killian's voice barked over the comms. Her boots pounded through the main corridor, half lit by flickering emergency strips. Trainees spilled out of mess tents, some fumbling with rifles, some ducking behind sandbag stacks, all eyes snapping toward the command building where the Founders. Shadow carved through the chaos, Drop a if you've ever felt danger come from where you least expected it. She slid to a stop at the security hub, once an old break room, now a nest of jury-rigged monitors and cracked handhelds. A young tech, Ramirez, jabbed a trembling finger at the central screen. "Look," he hissed. The grainy thermal feed showed 2 guards sprawled by the motor pool gate, both out cold but alive. Between them, a single figure in black tactical gear moved like a ghost, slipping through shadows that should have been too thin to hide him. Killian stomped in behind her, sweat and rage burning under his field jacket. How the hell did he get past the outer motion grid? That fence was triple-checked after the gas leak. "It wasn't the fence," Mara said, voice tight. She pointed to the feed, where the figure paused under a cracked sodium lamp. For a fraction of a second, the pale glow revealed a rank insignia 1 that should never have been here. A Unit 0 patch. Betrayal doesn't always come with a declaration. Sometimes it wears your badge, your colors, your trust stitched right into its seams. Mara snapped her gaze to Ramirez. "Lock the motor pool gates. Drop every internal blast door from here to Barracks D. No traffic past the old firing range." Ramirez's fingers danced over the cracked console. Steel doors rumbled shut down the corridor, sealing off possible breach points. But it wouldn't stop someone who knew every bolt, every hidden crawl space, someone she might have trained herself. "Where's our counter team?" Killian demanded. "Coming online," Mara murmured. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't enough. The trainees were green. Half their instructors were casualties from the gas line breach. And whoever was inside the fence tonight wasn't here to steal a truck or sabotage the uplink. They were here for her. Drop of, if you've ever been forced to face down one of your own. She flicked her eyes to the old weapons cage behind Ramirez. Her fingers closed around a battered carbine, its barrel pitted but serviceable. She racked the action with a single cold snap. "Stay here," she said to the young tech. "If he breaches this door, shred the files and torch the drives. Unit 0 only lives if its ghosts stay buried." Ramirez swallowed, eyes wide. But he nodded. He'd do it. She saw it in his shaking hands. Already hovering over the drive bays, Killian followed her down the corridor, boots echoing in the half-dark. As they rounded the corner near the mess hall, a stray shadow shifted by the supply crates. Mara's reflexes spoke before her thoughts. She lunged, one hand catching a sleeve, the other pressing her barrel to the intruder's gut. "Whoa, found her!" It was Harris, a fresh-faced trainee with a crooked nose and eyes too young for the iron she saw in them now. "I heard you were rallying counter teams. I'm here. Tell me what you need." She released him, eyes scanning the dark corners behind. "Find Lieutenant Vaughn. Tell him to lock down the south corridor. No one comes through that maintenance crawl except me." Harris bolted, his footsteps fading into the distance. Killian's eyes met hers in the pale hallway light. "You think it's Vaughn?" he asked, Mara's jaw clenched. "I don't think. I know he knows that tunnel. And I know he's got debts that Command didn't wipe when they cut us off." She remembered the way Vaughn always hovered near the old storage wing, the way his eyes flicked to the uplink codes during her briefings. She remembered every slip, every half-finished word. The perimeter lights flickered, then failed altogether. Darkness fell like a blanket soaked in oil. The emergency strips kicked in, casting blood-red bars of light along the corridor floor. Then the first gunshot cracked. Distant but inside the fence. Mara dropped to a knee, carbine up, senses sharpening to a point so fine it hurt. She could feel the pulse in her throat, the taste of the desert grit on her tongue. Somewhere behind these walls, a traitor was hunting her like quarry, and she would not be easy prey. She signaled Killian forward. They moved like they'd done it 100 times. Cover angles, cross signals, one sweeping left while the other watched their six. It wasn't elegant. It was instinct honed by 100 midnight drills with her father's ghost whispering, "Breathe. Pivot. Hold." They reached the junction by the maintenance tunnel. The steel door was already ajar, and in that sliver of darkness she saw him, Vaughn. Crouched, knife drawn, eyes wide with the fever of betrayal. "Mara," he hissed, voice cracked by nerves. "They offered more than you ever did. I got people to feed. Debts you can't cover with stories and old glory." She kept the carbine steady on his chest. "Who's they, Vaughn? Who owns you now?" But he only laughed a brittle, desperate bark that bounced off the steel walls. Then he lunged, the tunnel filled with the roar of a single shot, and the Founder's legacy, one more ghost in Unit 0, stayed standing. The single gunshot ricocheted through the corridor, bouncing off rusted pipes and cracked cinder block until it seemed to ring in Mara's bones. The echo faded, but the silence that followed felt heavier than any battle cry. Killian stood behind her, one boot nudging the crumpled shape of Vaughn, whose eyes stared wide at the cracked ceiling, as if searching for a promise that never came. Mara kept the carbine shouldered, breath measured. There was no celebration here, no triumphant cheer for unmasking the traitor. Vaughn had been one of them once, and the weight of that loss settled into the hollows of her ribs, like a stone dropped into deep water. "Founder," Killian's voice rasped at her shoulder, "we're clear on this wing. Ramirez is sweeping the archives for any sign of data breach." "Good," she said, voice flat but steady. She reached down, plucked Vaughn's ID badge from the ragged collar, and slipped it into her pocket beside the crumpled visitor pass. Ghosts deserve to be remembered, at least by her. Drop a if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted. Outside the maintenance tunnel, the compound had settled into an uneasy hush. The perimeter lights flickered back to life, shaky but holding. Trainees and field medics lingered near the mess hall, whispering in small knots. News traveled fast when you had nowhere else to run. Mara stepped out into the open yard. Eyes darted away from hers, some wide with fear, some flickering with a glint she knew all too well. Doubt she could not afford. She climbed the old sandbag wall that overlooked the compound's battered courtyard. From there, she could see everything: cots lined in uneven rows, medics working under floodlamps, the scorched scars where the gas leak had blown the reinforced blast doors apart days ago. Unit 0 still looked like a half-finished ruin. But now cracks spidered deeper than steel and concrete. Now they split through trust. Killian climbed up beside her, eyes scanning the yard. "They're waiting on you, Mara, the ones who stayed. The ones who saw you put Vaughn down." She let the silence settle around them like dust. The wind whispered across the yard, tugging at the shredded Unit 0 flag that still clung to its rusted pole. She remembered when she'd stitched that flag by hand, using scraps from her mother's old field medic satchel. She'd meant it to stand for something more than secrecy, something more than ghosts. "It wasn't just Vaughn," she said quietly. "We know that." Killian's mouth twitched. "Yeah, he was a pawn. There's still a hand moving pieces we can't see." She nodded. "Then we draw them out." A hush fell over the courtyard as she raised one hand, a simple gesture, but enough to pull every scattered gaze to her. She could feel the weight of every hidden fear pressing down on the trainees who'd only ever heard her name in rumors. "Listen up," she called. Her voice didn't need to be loud. The quiet made it sharper. "You want to run? There's the gate." She gestured to the half-collapsed main entrance, where battered transport trucks still smoldered from last week's supply convoy ambush. That no one moved. "You stay here," she continued. "You follow orders. Not just mine. Each other's. Unit 0 stands because we know the worst thing that can crawl inside these walls isn't fire, or bullets, or gas leaks." She glanced down at the visitor badge she'd crumpled in her pocket. Her thumb rubbed over the ragged plastic, the ghost of who they'd thought she was. "It's betrayal. That's the only breach that kills us for good. Drop it if you've ever had to rebuild trust from ashes." Someone coughed. Somewhere near the triage tent, a young recruit sniffled, pressing gauze to his wounded shoulder. But no one stepped. Back. No one asked to leave. Killian turned, voice rough but proud. What's the play, Founder? She scanned the compound's battered perimeter, mind racing through old schematics and newer scars. We secure what's left. We double the fire watch on the south fence. Rotate fresh eyes every 2 hours. No one pulls solo watch until this is buried. Her eyes flicked to the old comms tower that jutted above the training yard like a broken finger. Its dish still spun crookedly, half its panels dangling from frayed wires. And we open the uplink, she added. Killian's head snapped toward her. You sure? Once Command sees you lit that beacon, they'll swarm this place like flies on fresh meat. She let out a humorless breath. Good, let them come. Better we flush the rest of these ghosts while the lights are on. A ripple of unease moved through the trainees as they picked up her words. She felt the question building behind their eyes. What happens when Command comes with more than questions next time? But she didn't give them time to dwell. She jumped from the sandbag wall, boots hitting cracked concrete with a solid thud. Prep the relay, she ordered. And someone, get me a line to every outpost that still has a pulse. As the courtyard shifted back into motion, Killian fell in step behind her. Mara, he said under his breath. You sure you're ready to stand in that light again? You won't get to be a ghost this time. She glanced over her shoulder, the edge of a smile ghosting her lips. I was never a ghost, Killian. Just a shadow waiting for the sun to hit. She reached the comms bunker and keyed in the access code. Her thumbprint hissed against the ancient reader. The blast door cracked open with a reluctant groan. Inside, the bunker was exactly as she'd left it. A skeleton of half-gutted servers, cracked monitors, and an ancient uplink console that hummed like a caged animal. She traced her fingers over the cold metal, remembering nights spent here tapping out dead-drop messages to supply contacts who never called back. Remembering the first time her father showed her how to strip and reroute a signal so clean it couldn't be traced. She flicked the main breaker. The console flickered, then came alive in a chorus of static and blinking LEDs. One by one, the satellite dishes outside began to rotate, scraping rust flakes into the desert wind. Killian watched her from the doorway, arms crossed. You're really gonna broadcast it all? Not all, she said. Just enough. A channel opened on the cracked display. Frequencies scrolled like falling rain-encrypted channels, Oldalite outposts. Decommissioned black sites that shouldn't have had ears anymore. She drew in a breath, tasting the copper tang of old ghosts. And she spoke. This is Founder Sinclair, Unit 0 stands. If you're listening, if you remember what this place means, don't wait for an invite. She paused, letting the words hang in the stale bunker air. Report in. We're burning the dead wood. And as the ancient uplink carried her voice out into the dark, Mara felt the shift begin. Somewhere, men and women she'd once called kin would hear the call and remember the creed buried in forgotten files. Some would answer. Some would come to bury her once and for all. Either way, Unit 0's ghosts were coming home. The old uplink tower shuddered as the signal found its teeth. Across the battered compound, antennas flickered back to life like lightning bugs in a storm, faint green eyes blinking out into the desert night. Mara stood at the edge of the comms bunker, the faint hum of the relay console vibrating through her palms, as if the bones of the place were stirring awake after a long, bitter sleep. Killian hovered by the rusted blast door, arms folded, eyes darting between the flickering monitors, and the trainees hustling to reinforce barricades. Beyond the fence, the darkness seemed to breathe. The desert wind carried whispers of old calcines, of enemies who might answer, of allies who might have turned in the long silence. Drop a if you've ever risked everything on one signal. Console crackled, then a voice, thin as ghost wire, slipped through the static. Unit 0, confirm. This is Outpost Echo 7. Repeat, Echo 7. Receiving your broadcast. Mara leaned closer, voice calm but edged with steel. Echo 7, this is Founder Sinclair. Authenticate. There was a pause, then the voice returned, stronger now, shaped by a note of disbelief. Code Alpha Delta 71. The quiet ones hold the line. That good enough for you? She closed her eyes for a heartbeat. Her father's creed, half whispered to her on freezing dawns when she'd first learned to fire without flinching. Good enough, she breathed. Echo 7, status. The voice wavered, then solidified. We're dark but alive. Half-hour. Gears scavenge junk. If command's on your back, we're not much good. But Mara cut him off. Hold your position. You're not the only ghost still breathing. Killian let out a low grunt, so the myth's not dead yet. That'll rattle command's cage. Mara's eyes didn't leave the scrolling channels. Good, let them rattle. Let them remember who built this house. Drop a, if you've ever called back someone everyone thought was gone. The chatter bled through the bunker walls, more outposts, trickling in one by one. Some voices so worn by static they barely sounded human anymore. A medic unit from the northern ridge, a supply cell buried under an old rail hub. Each carried a scrap of the creed she'd bled into these walls. Each voice a reminder that Unit 0 had never truly died, just gone to ground. Waiting for the Founder's call. By dawn, the relay console was a living thing, lights dancing. Across old schematics taped to the cracked monitors, her handwritten fallback code still stuck to the steel frame with yellowed tape, the courtyard outside hummed with motion. Trainees rotated through watch shifts, cleaned weapons, rebuilt perimeter. Traps. And through it all, the myth of the Founder spread like wildfire. Mara stepped outside as the first pale fingers of sunlight clawed over the desert hills. She blinked at the sight-tough, exhausted recruits running drills by the makeshift barricades. Field medics cross-checking trauma packs, stockpiling 4 bags scavenged from an abandoned rural clinic. She caught Ramirez at the old supply shed, coaxing a sputtering generator to life with a muttered prayer. She could feel it, Unit 0's heartbeat, fragile but strong. Stronger than the ghosts who'd once claimed it dead. But trust was still the thinnest wall they had. She found Killian in the mess hall, a battered tin mug of burnt coffee cradled in his hands. He raised it in salute as she approached. "Morning, Founder," he said, voice rough as gravel. "Looks like you pulled the dead out of the grave." She sank onto the bench across from him. They were never dead, just waiting for the right signal. Killian's eyes narrowed. "You know this'll draw more than allies, right?" Echo 7 Ridge. All those cells, they're beacons. The same wolves that turned Vaughn will smell the blood. Mara nodded. She pulled the crumpled visitor badge from her pocket, the plastic slick with old sweat and desert grit. She set it on the table between them, next to Vaughn's torn ID patch. "No more ghosts," she said. "No more shadows. We hold the line in daylight now." Killian grunted. "You're gonna make command flinch." "Good." She stood, the dawn breeze catching at her sleeve. "Let them." Before she could say more, the compound's outer alarm wailed a long, low moan that vibrated through the corrugated roofs like a threat made of steel. She sprinted for the sandbag wall. From the lookout post she saw it, a lone truck bouncing through the desert scrub, kicking up a rooster tail of dust behind it. No convoy, no insignia. Ramirez's voice crackled over the field com. Inbound vehicle, no transponder, no IFF, no standard supply code. Should we engage? Mara squinted into the rising sun. The truck lurched to a halt 50 yards from the fence. A single figure stepped out, a woman in ragged desert BDUs, helmet half busted, one arm strapped tight to her chest in a field sling. Then she raised her other hand, palm open. Universal surrender. Mara lifted her own field glasses. Her breath caught when she saw the faded patch on the woman's shoulder, Unit 0's crest. Half burned but unmistakable. "Open the gate," she ordered. Killian leaned over the barricade. Found her. Do it. The gate clanged open. On its rusty rails, the woman stumbled through, boots dragging in the dust. Mara jogged forward, catching her under the good arm just before her knees buckled. Name? Mara asked, voice low. The woman's cracked lips twisted in a grim smile. Riley, Echo 7. They found us. Mara's eyes went cold. How many? Riley sagged against her. Too many. She heard the word behind the word. Coming for you. She glanced back at the trainees clustering by the fence. Weapons half lifted, fear starting to pool in their eyes again. No more shadows. No more ghosts. She squeezed Riley's shoulder. You're safe now. We hold this line. But in the pit of her gut, Mara knew the real siege had just begun. And this time, no perimeter alarm would save them. This time, it was Unit Zero against the wolves they'd created, and she would not break first. Riley's labored breaths rattled like loose shell casings in the cold dawn. Mara guided her into the battered med tent, the canvas flaps snapping in the desert wind as if the compound itself was bracing for the storm to come. Inside, the air was heavy with antiseptic and sweat. Medics shuffled between cots, but all eyes snapped to the door as the founder pushed through. Her arm braced around the wounded woman's waist. Drop a, if you've ever had to keep moving when you were barely standing. Clear this cot, Mara barked. Ramirez scrambled to strip the blood-soaked blankets from a stretcher. Riley crumpled onto it, grimacing as her teeth rattled with a fever chill. A young corpsman leaned in, eyes flicking to Mara for permission before cutting away the makeshift sling. Bruises bloomed purple and yellow along Riley's collarbone, a nasty fracture hiding under raw skin. Riley hissed through her teeth. They hit Echo 7 an hour after we broadcast. Must have been tracking your signal. Mara's eyes narrowed. Who? The wounded scout coughed, spitting iron-tasting blood into her palm. Can't say for sure. They wore our old gear. Old calcines. But the tactics? Not ours. They knew the fallback routes. Cut off our fuel dump, then boxed us in the dry well. Half my team didn't make it. A medic pressed a syringe to Riley's arm, but she batted it away with surprising force. Save the juice. I'm no good to you doped up. Riley, you're no good to me dead, Mara shot back, but the edge in her voice softened when she pressed a palm to the woman's forehead. Fever. Deep bone fever. Killian's broad shape darkened the doorway, boots crusted with fresh dust. He'd just come from the South Watch, and the lines under his eyes were deeper than the day before. If they're moving an old Unit Zero kit, it's an inside job. Maybe a fragment of the old spec teams went freelance. Mara snorted. Freelance? You know damn well Command's the only shop that's kept our stockpile secure. If someone's moving in our skin, they've got high clearance or high leverage. Killian's jaw worked around the unspoken answer. Or both. Drop a, if you've ever felt hunted by your own past. Riley tried to sit up, but a fresh wave of pain pinned her to the cot. She grabbed Mara's wrist with a strength that seemed to drain what little color she had left. You have to reinforce the North Ridge. That's where they'll come. Old runoff tunnels, remember? They'll punch through at dawn tomorrow if they're smart. Mara brushed her thumb across Riley's knuckles, a simple, steadying gesture. Rest, you did your part. But inside, her mind roared with blueprints and breached fences, with old schematics she'd etched in the bunker's concrete walls. When Unit Zero was still a rumor, she knew those tunnels. She'd crawled through them at 15, mapping air currents and hidden choke points when her mother taught her that evacuation routes always doubled as kill lanes. Outside, the compound pulsed with frantic energy. Ramirez scrambled to patch the relay feed. The trainees rotated watch shifts with grim determination. Each whispered rumor of old Unit Zero wolves stalking their perimeter frayed trust like dry rope. It was exactly how an enemy who knew them would work slit the belly open with fear, Let it bleed from the inside out. She didn't have time to patch every wound. She had to make them bleed first. Hours bled into the scorched afternoon. The desert sun climbed high, baking the compound's cracked concrete until the air shimmered. Mara stalked the courtyard with a half-burned map tucked under her arm, an original schematic sheet. Her father's penciled notes still scrawled. In the margins, she stopped at the old north wall, a rusted line of shipping containers and sandbags stacked 3 rows deep. It had always been their weakest link. The drainage tunnels beneath it ran for half a mile into the Badlands, meant to flush floodwaters when the storms came. Now they were a perfect backdoor for a ghost unit that remembered where the lights didn't reach. "Killian," she barked. The old major stomped up beside her, sweat rolling down his neck. "Position 2 squads in the tunnels. Stagger them. Every 50 meters. Claymores on choke points low and dirty. If they push through, we corral them to the kill box here." She jabbed the pencil at a rough square drawn at the north gate. "And you?" Killian asked. She didn't look up. "I'll be in the tunnels too," he frowned. "Founder," she cut him off. "I built these veins, Killian. I know every bend. They'll expect a wall. They won't expect me inside their teeth. Droppa, if you've ever had to walk straight into a threat, you made yourself dot by dusk." The compound felt like a breathing, thin muscles tensed, eyes wide, the heartbeat of boots scuffing sand and the rattle of old rifles chambered and ready. Young recruits with patchy buzz cuts whispered prayers against the bunker walls. Ramirez perched in the cum's shack, headset clamped so tight it left bruises on his temples. Riley drifted in and out of a pain-fogged doze under the medic's watchful eye. Every so often, her lips moved around the same phrase, "Northridge, north. Ridge, North Ridge." When the sun slipped behind the far ridge, the desert night came alive with the familiar hush that always warned Mara something worse was coming. She adjusted her body armor, checking the battered carbine's chamber one last time. The stock was cracked from the night she'd taken Vaughn down. She liked it that way, in perfect steel that still fired true. Killian fell in step beside her as she approached the tunnel mouth. "You're sure they'll come tonight?" She gave him a look that made his next question die in his throat. "They'll come," she said. Then she slipped into the drain tunnel, boots silent against the concrete. The darkness swallowed her, just like it had when she was a girl, crawling through these same veins with only her mother's whispers to guide her. Breathe, move, hold the line. Behind her, Unit Zero's fragile heart waited, braced against the storm dot, and in the black gut of the earth, Mara Sinclair, founder, became the blade she'd always hidden behind the badge they'd thought was just plastic. The wolves would come, and she would meet them with teeth. The tunnels drank the sound of her footsteps the way dry sand swallowed rain silently, hungrily, leaving no trace. Mara pressed her shoulder against the cold concrete wall, breath measured, carbine tucked tight to her ribs. The only light came from the faint glow of the emergency chem stick strapped to her belt, soft green halos that painted the curved walls in restless shadow. Behind her, the young recon pair she'd chosen crawled along in staggered intervals. Ramirez, sweating through his bandana, kept one hand glued to the portable comms unit on his back. Harris, the wiry recruit with the crooked nose, moved like he'd been born in crawl spaces, silent, eyes wide, fear pressed flat beneath the surface. Were her eyes her backup? But she was the blade. Droppa, if you've ever gone looking for the thing everyone else hopes will just pass by. Up ahead, the tunnel pinched into an old storm drain, one of a dozen bends her father had always called natural kill lanes. Her thumb grazed the stock of her carbine. She could still hear him. When you build something to protect, you also build the ways it can destroy you. She stopped, one hand signaling Ramirez to kill the cum chatter. They huddled in the dark as a distant vibration rumbled through the concrete, barely. There, but real. Boots. Slow, deliberate boots. Not the scurry of rodents or the cautious shuffle of her own watch teams. These were hunters. A drop of sweat slid down her spine. She flicked her wrist, and Harris moved forward on his belly, pressed so flat to the tunnel floor that for a heartbeat, he seemed to disappear into the grit. Through the static of her thoughts, she heard the muffled radio buzz on Ramirez's back. Killian's voice, strained, distant. Breach perimeter, multiple contacts copy. Found her hold. The Mara's pulse ticked once, twice. She pressed 2 fingers to her CUM unit, voice barely above the tunnel's whisper. Tunnel hold. Echo. Confirm breach but maintain silence. We close the teeth here. Ramirez's eyes glinted in the chemstick's glow. He understood, even if his lips trembled around the edge of a question he never spoke. Drop a, if you've ever felt safer in the dark than in the open. The boots grew louder. Shadows shifted at the far end of the drain tunnel. She could see shapes now 3, maybe 4. Mismatched gear, battered field jackets, but unmistakable in the way they moved. Unit Zero's training. Stolen and warped. The lead figure paused under the crumbling concrete arch. A battered helmet shifted side to side, scanning the shadows. Then a soft click laser sight, tracing the dark. Mara held her breath, carbine braced against her cheek. 1 heartbeat, 2, then she squeezed. The tunnel exploded in muzzle flashes. And thunder. The lead shape crumpled forward, throat torn out by a 3-round burst. Another figure ducked left, but Harris was already there, blade flashing. Wet sounds echoed off the drain walls. Ramirez sucked in a shaky breath, but didn't scream. His trembling hands pressed to the CUMS unit like a rosary. Silence. The tunnel swallowed it all again. Mara crouched, eyes darting to the shadows behind. The fallen intruders. Her heartbeat slowed. The next wave would come. She needed to pull the teeth before they regrouped. Strip their gear, she ordered. Harris wiped his blade on a sleeve, already moving to drag the bodies into the blind. Corner, Ramirez knelt, rummaging through pouches, pockets, battered CUM units that still hummed with static. Then he froze, fingers curling around a scrap of plastic tucked in the dead man's chest rig. A visitor pass. Her pass. Ramirez's eyes flicked to hers, wide with the question he didn't dare say. Mara plucked the pass from his shaking grip. She turned it over her biometric string, her fake clearance level. A perfect copy. They'd come dressed in her skin. She tucked the pass into her vest, ignoring the cold needle prickling the back of her neck. They were telling her something. Whoever was pulling these strings, they wanted her to see it. Killian's voice rasped over the open channel again, clearer this time. Founder status? She clicked her CUM twice, the old silent code for clear, but watch your flanks. Drop. A. If you've ever faced someone who knew exactly how you'd react. They pushed deeper into the drain tunnel, leapfrogging from blind corner to blind corner. The air grew colder, the wind outside howling through grated vents above. Somewhere behind them, distant rifle fire rattled the compound's fragile calm. But here, in the veins she'd carved from concrete and fear, Mara felt the strange calm. Of an old wound split open, raw but familiar, they found the second wave crouched at the old overflow gate. 4 men, all wearing faded Unit Zero insignia, all armed like they'd crawled out of her training nightmares. They didn't expect her to come from below. Harris cracked a flashbang. Ramirez ducked. Mara rose from the tunnel mouth, a ghost given. Flesh, and squeezed the carbine's trigger until her shoulder ached from the recoil. When it was done, only the wind moaned through the concrete. Hours later, dawn threatened the desert horizon again. The siege had slowed to a cold standstill, no new shadows in the drain tunnels, no fresh breach at the North Ridge. But Mara knew the wolves were still there. They'd tasted her perimeter. They'd shown her they could wear her colors. She crawled. From the tunnels, boots scraping the rusted ladder as she emerged into the compound yard. Her eyes burned from the grit and the echoes of muzzle flashes. Trainees clustered near the mess tent, half dreaming, half holding rifles like talismans. Against the dark, Riley, still half conscious, blinked up from her cot when Mara passed. The woman's voice cracked through her fever. "Found her, did we hold?" Mara brushed a hand across her hair. "For tonight." Killian stomped over, boots caked in tunnel mud. He dropped a battered helmet at her feet. Inside, a visitor pass. Identical to hers lay tucked into the lining. "They're not trying to break the fence," he said, voice raw. "They're trying to break you." She stared at the pass, her thumb tracing the barcode that should have died the second she took the founder's name back. "They're not ghosts," she murmured. "They're puppets, and someone's pulling the strings from just out of reach." She turned, eyes raking the bruised dawn sky beyond the compound wall. Somewhere out there, the real enemy waited, watching, learning. A wolf dressed in her skin dot, and if they wanted her broken, they'd have to come get her the old-fashioned way, head on, because the next time they came, the tunnels wouldn't save. Them dot she would. She stood tall under the tattered Unit 0 flag, wind cutting her face raw dot, and in that moment, every wide-eyed recruit and every old ghost that lingered in the shadows knew the truth. The founder wasn't waiting for daylight. She was daylight. The dawn brought no relief, just another harsh slap of sunlight on cracked concrete and wide eyes that hadn't slept in hours. Unit 0's yard looked like a battlefield paused mid-breath. Scorched barricades, spent casings piled in buckets. Trainees hunched over ration packs with 1,000-yard stares. The air stank of grit and sweat and the chemical bite of gun oil. Mara stood in the command shack, the visitor pass copy pinned to the rusted tactical board behind her. It mocked her in the dull glow of the bare bulb overhead, a plastic ghost of who she'd pretended to be, now used as bait to cut her open from the inside. Killian paced in front of her, boots thumping across cracked tile. "They're testing us. You see it, don't you? Every push last night was probing, never a full breach. They're waiting until you slip." Mara didn't look up from the schematic she'd taped to the table. It was an old water main map, hand-annotated in pencil. Every line, every forgotten maintenance hatch, she'd memorized years ago because her father always said you never let a structure keep its secrets from you. "They want us on edge," she murmured. "They want eyes so wide open they stop seeing what's real." She jabbed a finger at the north sector. "We're going to make them think they have us cornered. Then we open the floor under them." Killian snorted. "You're planning a snare inside your own veins?" A ghost of a smile tugged her mouth. "Always did like cleaning the tunnels the hard way. Drop of, if you've ever turned your enemy's plan back on them that by afternoon." The compound buzzed with a quiet, electric tension. Trainees reinforced the old water main access points, welding steel plates in place and rerouting flood valves. Every move was deliberate misdirection, false signs of weakness. Just enough to bait a trained eye into thinking they'd found the crack. Riley limped out to the sandbag line on a makeshift crutch. She looked like a scarecrow draped and battered. BDUs, but her eyes stayed locked on the horizon. "They'll hit tonight," she croaked. "Mark my words. Last night was the ghost pass. This one's the blade." Mara stood beside her, one arm resting on her carbine, eyes tracking the way the wind kicked dust off the distant ridge. "Then we show them what happens when a blade cuts both ways. Drop a, if you've ever had to fight dirty to protect. What's yours?" When dusk bled across the desert, Mara moved like a phantom through her own house. She checked the new claymore placements at the main tunnel mouth, recalibrated the perimeter sensors, whispered corrections to the youngest recruits whose eyes shone too bright in the dark. She stopped by the triage tent. Riley's breathing rattled. In her sleep, pale skin stretched tight over bruised bones. Mara brushed a hand across the woman's forehead. "Rest easy. You got us here." Then she slipped into the drain tunnel one last time. Ramirez crouched by the flood valve hatch. "Comes." Unit humming under his jacket. "They'll come for this main, right? They'll come for me, Mara said. Same difference. She traced her thumb across the old visitor pass clone, now strapped to her vest like a lure. Let them think they could wear her skin again. Let them crawl right into her teeth. The first shots cracked just after midnight muffled pops that bounced through the tunnel like whispered threats. Mara pressed her back to the damp wall, breath low, carbine angled down the choke point she'd carved out with her father's old entrenching tool. Decades ago, two shadows emerged from the gloom. Not trainees, not green and jittery. These moved like they'd memorized every step. Old Unit Zero bones dressed in the same tactical black she'd once helped design. She let them close, let the bait drag them deeper. Then she gave a tiny nod. Ramirez, hidden behind the blind bend, flicked the portable detonator. The claymores thundered. Fire and shrapnel turned the tunnel into a steel coffin. She caught the glint of a visitor pass clone flung clear of the blast, the plastic edges curling as it melted into slag. Drop if you've ever had to burn a piece of yourself to save. The rest, the silence that followed, was pure, heavy, alive with the weight of a plan that had teeth. Mara emerged from the blast zone, boots crunching through spent debris, carbine sweeping for stragglers. Harris appeared from the shadows behind her, pale and sweating but grinning through the powder burns on his cheeks. Found her, that was clean. He rasped. She ruffled his sweat-damp hair, an old gesture from a past she'd buried, so deep it surprised her to feel its surface. Don't get cocky, Harris. Ghosts have more than one skin. By dawn, the drain tunnels were sealed for good. Blowout charges collapsed the old flood valves, turning the hidden arteries into concrete tombs. It hurt her more than she'd admit. She'd built those veins as safe ways out. Now they were dead ends for the wolves who'd learned to use them. In the yard, the trainees formed up under the tattered Unit Zero flag. Their faces were raw with exhaustion, but something fierce burned behind the dirt smudges and bandaged cuts. They'd seen the Founder's hand. They'd seen what happened when someone tried to turn her house inside out. Killian stood at her shoulder, battered rifle slung across his broad back. You think they'll try again? Mara let the melted visitor pass clone fall from her pocket into the sand. She ground it under her boot heel until nothing was left but scorched grit. They'll try again, she said. But they'll come over the wall next time. They're out of tunnels, out of shadows. The next breach will be in daylight. She turned to the line of trainees' kids she'd once thought too soft to last a week inside Unit Zero's bones. Now they held their rifles like they'd never let them go. You think you're tired now? She called out, voice like gravel but clear as a bell. Good. Stay tired, stay hungry. Because the next time they come, they'll look like us. They'll talk like us. And you will not hesitate. No one flinched. No one looked away, she felt. The old ghosts at her back, her father's sniper lessons at dawn, her mother's sutures under a storm lamp. The cold concrete she'd carved into veins that could bleed but never die. This was Unit Zero. Not a badge. Not a visitor pass. Not a rumor. A living thing, teeth bared, waiting for the next Wolf to crawl through the wire. And this time, Mara Sinclair would be waiting in the light. The desert sun rose like a bloodshot eye, glaring down on Unit Zero's battered walls. Mara Sinclair stood at the compound's highest watch post, an old comms tower stripped of its satellite dish but sturdy enough to carry her weight and the burden she refused to drop. From here, she could see the sprawl of the camp, trainees moving like ghosts between barricades, engineers rewiring the fried uplink relays, and beyond it all, the wasted ridges where the next threat waited for the right hour to strike. She rested one hand on the rusted railing, the wind tugging strands of hair from her braid. She didn't flinch when Killian's boots scraped the graded steps behind her. Founder. His voice was rough, stripped to its old bones by sleepless nights and too much smoke. Ridge Patrol found new footprints near the old west fence. Same boots, same pattern. She didn't turn. Same ghosts. Killian grunted. We collapsed their tunnels. They shouldn't have this many eyes left. But they keep coming, like they're reading your mind before you set the traps. Mara's gaze flicked to the shredded Unit 0 flag, snapping on its rusted pole. They're reading my mind because they've studied my skin. They're counting on me to stand where I built this place strong and break where I know it's weak. Droppa, if you've ever felt your past used like a weapon against you. By dusk, the compound crackled with a cold, anxious energy. Recruits double-checked field dressings and cleaned battered rifles on crate tops. The old mess hall had become an armory and triage ward in equal measure. Riley, propped up on a cot with her arm in a fresh sling, fixed her with a look that carried. More steel than any rank. You've got eyes up top, Founder? Riley rasped. If they hit tonight, they won't crawl. They'll come roaring through the front like they own it. Mara crouched beside her, adjusting the drip line feeding into Riley's battered arm. I've got eyes, she said, but I need yours too. Riley's grin was more a baring of teeth. Thought you'd never ask. By nightfall, the perimeter was alive with spotlights and fresh barricades. Killian's squads rotated in pairs, overlapping fields of fire. No more tunnels. No more hidden veins. Only the straight, brutal lines where steel and flesh collided when the world gave up on subtlety. Mara stood just inside the main gate, helmet pushed back so she could feel the bite of the wind. Her old visitor pass now half-melted hung from her neck like a talisman, a reminder that sometimes you had to wear the thing they used to break you. Ramirez jogged up, breath clouding in the night air. Recon drones picking up heat plumes west ridge. Bigger than before. Could be decoys, but, she nodded, finishing the thought for him. But we don't bet on ghosts we can't see. Get Harris up top. I want that ridge backlit like a stage. Droppa, if you've ever stood guard against an enemy you knew would come. It started at 0200 like it always did, when exhaustion dragged the strongest eyes into half-dreams. The first crack was a single suppressed shot that clipped the corner spotlight. Darkness swallowed the fence in one ragged gulp. Then the charge. Dozens of shapes, all clad in scraps of Unit 0 kit, lunged from the ridge scrub. Mismatched rifles, black field masks. And every single one carried the weight of her name on their tongues. Mara barked into her throat mic. Sector 4 up. Sector 5 rotate and hold the wire. No tunnel fallback, stand your ground. Tracer. Rounds stitched the night with lines of fire. The compound rattled with the staccato of overlapping rifles. Ramirez's panicked voice flared through the coms. Gate, breach, Founder, north wall. She pivoted on the tarmac, boots skidding across the sand-scoured concrete. Her carbine was up before her pulse could catch up. The gate rattled under the weight of the push, a wave of silhouettes pressing shoulder to shoulder, knives flashing in the glare of the last working floodlight. She caught the glint of her own patch stitched onto a traitor's vest before her rounds punched him flat to the dirt. By the time the surge broke the first barricade, Mara was in the thick of it, boots braced in the gap, shoulder to shoulder with Killian, Harris, and a pair of trainees whose names she'd only half learned in the last 2 days. They moved as a single blade, striking and shifting, dragging the intruders deeper into the choke point where crossfire turned flesh to shadows. Her shoulder burned from the kick of the carbine. Her ears rang with the familiar savage music of battle. Harris hissed at her over the rattle of his SMG. They keep coming. How do they keep? Mara shot a glance at the one she'd just dropped. No. Standard ID, no fresh blood on the boots. They're burning their old bones. That's how. They'd rather break the blade than let it stand. Droppa, if you've ever fought someone who would rather lose everything than see you win. Dawn crept in on bruised feet. The courtyard looked like a ruin held together by will alone. Bodies lay where they'd fallen, some friend, some foe. Some wearing the same colors so wrong it made her teeth ache to look. Ramirez limped out from the shadows of the comms tower, headset still clamped to his battered skull. Signal just came through. Echo 7's fallback outpost is dark. Ridge. Cell is dark. Whoever's funding these ghosts, they're closing the door behind every asset they spend. Mara stared at the blood-stained gate, the sandbag barricade pocked with new bullet holes. Which means they're betting everything on the next push. Killian's face was gray in the dawn light. They'll try once more. When the sun's up, make it final. She nodded. Then we hold once more. And when they come, they'll find the founder waiting. She felt the battered visitor pass thump against her chest in the wind. Once, it had been a lie she'd hidden behind. Now it was a promise hers to keep, or hers to bury if they failed. She turned to the ragged circle of trainees, their eyes cracked wide with exhaustion, but steady now. Flaring with that stubborn spark she'd always counted on. Eat what you can, hydrate, load every mag you can find. She ordered, and stand ready. They think we're ghosts? Fine, we'll haunt them until there's nothing left for them to wear but our scars. Ramirez coughed a laugh. Founder, when do we sleep? Mara's eyes cut to the horizon, already painted gold and raw with the new day. When the last Volf is dead and the fence is ours again. Killian grunted, lifting his rifle to his shoulder. Then we'd better make it quick. They braced for the next wave, weapons ready, breath held just behind their teeth. And Mara Sinclair, Founder, Ghost, Blade, Daylight stood at the breach with every secret they'd used to hunt her now. Turned back like sharpened steel. When the final charge came, Unit Zero would not flinch, and they would not die in the dark. The sun rose hard and white, baking the compound's battered walls, and the men and women braced behind them. Mara Sinclair paced the perimeter, boots crunching across broken concrete, eyes tracing every angle of the sandbag walls and scorched fences. She could feel it, the weight of silence just before a breach, the heavy breath before a storm. It was a sound she'd learned to read as a child in her father's sniper nest, the hush that means someone's sights are on you. Drop a... If you've ever felt the storm coming for you before you heard it. Ramirez shadowed her, headset jammed so deep it left red grooves on his scalp. His voice was raw from hours of barking orders and patching together dying signals. Founder Echo 7's line went dark for good. Ridge fallback didn't answer our last ping. Whoever's behind this, they're cutting every thread except the one around your throat. Mara kept walking. Good, then they have to come through me. At the main gate, Harris leaned against a crate of fresh mags, eyes so wide they seemed to drink the whole desert. His knuckles were raw where they scraped the blast doors closed and open all night. He managed a grin. Founder, they hit us now, no. Tunnels, no hidden veins. Just steel and the line. Like the old drills, right? Mara knelt, tugging his helmet strap snug. Better, because we're not drills anymore. We're real, and we're angry. She pushed him toward the ramparts. Take your position. Watch for the first Volf. They came just past midday, when the sun was high enough to cook the resolve out of any man who didn't believe in the line he held. The first push was subtle, a single figure, draped in scavenged Unit Zero gear, lurching out from the ridge scrub like a wounded dog. He dropped to his knees just short of the perimeter, hands raised, lips moving around a horse. Plea Mara could barely catch through her scope. Help me, Founder, please. She didn't flinch. The man's left hand twitched at the wrong angle. The sun caught a glint of steel near his collar deadman switch wired to a belt-pack dot. She squeezed the trigger. The shape folded backward like a cut puppet. The explosion flared, shredding the scrub and sending a shockwave rattling the outer barricade. But the line held. Drop us if you've ever had to pull the trigger on something you once would have tried to save. Killian's voice thundered from the south wall. Second wave, multiple contacts. Same gear, same damn trick. Mara barked. Into the comes, her words crisp as gunfire. Sector 3, no warnings. Anything in our skin gets dropped before it hits the wire. We are not a hospice. We are not a grave. The compound roared back to life. Trainees moved with the cold clarity. She'd hammered into them these past days, no hesitation. No whispers of second guesses. Just the line. Just the teeth. Harris dropped 2 shapes by the storage shed, both dragging patched backpacks rigged with old cum units, each humming with ghost signals meant to jam their eyes. Ramirez shredded the last one with a short burst from the old tower rifle, the recoil punching him back into the sandbag wall. Found her. He gasped, wiping blood from his nose. They're not trying to break in. They're trying to strip your trust while you bleed. She rested a hand on his shoulder, voice low but steady. Then trust the line, Ramirez. Trust the blood that stays, not the blood that runs. Hours ground by like teeth on stone. The sun dipped, the shadows stretched. Every heartbeat felt like the tick of a clock they couldn't reset. In the triage tent, Rayleigh sat propped on her cot, watching the breach through a ragged flap in the canvas. She bared her teeth when Mara passed. They're losing, she rasped. And they know it. The next push will be the last. Mara dropped to one knee beside her. Then you rest. Let me carry the rest. Rayleigh's laugh rattled her broken ribs. No chance in hell. You go down, Founder. I'll crawl out there with a scalpel in my teeth. Drop us if you've ever had a friend ready to bleed beside you to the end. When it came, it didn't come like a wave, it came like a thunderclap. The ridges erupted with muzzle flashes, rolling booms rattling the compound walls. Dozens of shapes poured out of the dusk, all clad in the same patchwork of Unit 0 insignia, their boots hammering sand into dust clouds that turned the sunset to blood. Mara stood at the breach, Killian and Harris flanking her, Ramirez calling out enemy coordinates through the headset wired straight to the spotters on the tower. Every bullet she fired tore another lie off their skins. These were not her people. These were ghosts reanimated to wear her trust as armor. And she would bury every last one herself. Harris screamed when a flashbang bounced off the barricade, the blast throwing him into the crate. He struggled to his feet, pupils blown wide, but mouth set in a snarl. He lifted his SMG, spraying a breech line so tight it felt like the night itself was howling. Killian roared behind her, shotgun barking. Mara ducked, rolled, came up behind a figure lunging over the sandbags with a blade drawn her blade. She recognized the old inscription on the steel. Hold the line. She wrenched the knife from the traitor's grasp and buried it in his throat. Minutes or hours, she couldn't tell which bled away as the line held. When the last shot cracked, silence rolled in like a cold tide. Bodies lay half buried in the churned sand, the compound lights flickering against a dawn that felt older than any they'd earned before. Ramirez slumped against the tower rail, headset dangling from his neck. Founder perimeters clear, no more heat signatures. No more ghost signals. We held it. Mara looked at her hands. They shook, but not with fear, just the slow drain of adrenaline that came when the blade finally went back into the sheath. She turned to the circle of exhausted trainees, every face marked by soot and blood, and something stronger than any uniform they'd ever worn. This is Unit 0, she said, her voice raw but unbroken. Not the ghosts they wore to break us. Not the lies they broadcast to bait us. Us, the ones who stay. The ones who bleed for each other. She dropped the old visitor pass, now crusted with blood and dust, into the sand at her feet. And we are not ghosts, she said. We are the ones who live. The sun rose, cruel and beautiful, washing the battered yard in gold. And under its light, the Founder stood among the ruins she'd built into a fortress of trust that would not die, no matter who wore her skin. Next, because the wolves had learned a last lesson too late. A ghost you make is never stronger than the one who never left. The sun sat like a molten coin on the horizon, its last rays catching on the blackened edges of Unit 0's battered barricades. Mara Sinclair stood in the wreckage of the main gate, one boot planted on the twisted steel that had once kept the wolves at bay. Behind her, The compound bristled with the quiet hum of the living. No drills, no frantic scrambling now. Just the steady pulse of survivors patching wounds and counting ammo they knew they might never get back. Killian shuffled over, shotgun slung low, his face crusted with sweat and grit. "They're not coming tonight," he rasped. "The ones that aren't dead or running, or wishing they were." Mara didn't look at him. Her eyes were locked on the dunes beyond the fence line, the same ridges where shadow shapes had tried to wear her skin. In the dusk, the sand looked almost clean again if you didn't look too close at the dark patches where old ghosts had fallen for good. Droppa, if you've ever cleaned up after a storm you knew would come again. She found Harris at the edge of the old tunnel mouth, what was left of it. He sat with his back to the collapsed shaft, a battered field notebook open on his knee. The pages were smudged with dirt and blood, but his pencil scratched on, steady. "Found her," he mumbled, without looking up. "You want me to keep logging the names? We can bury the pass fakes with proper tags this time." She crouched next to him, the quiet between them more comfortable than any pep talk could be. "Log them all," she said. "Every ghost they wore to break us. They don't get to be forgotten just because they were used." Harris nodded. "You ever think," he paused, pencil hovering mid-word, "you ever think you'll stop seeing their faces?" Mara's answer was a small, tired breath of a laugh. "No, and that's how we stay what they couldn't break. Drop at you if you've ever carried someone else's ghost because it mattered." That much. By the time she walked back to the courtyard, the trainees had clustered near the mess tent's half-burned frame. Someone, Ramirez, probably had rigged a field projector from scraps and a half-working battery bank. Flickering across the scorched canvas was an old Unit 0 training reel, blurry footage of her father, drilling recruits on the range. Her mother's quick hand suturing a wound under a single swing lamp. Riley, leaning on a crutch, caught Mara's arm as she passed. "They're waiting," she said, voice so hoarse it sounded like wind scraping bone. "For what?" Mara asked. Though she knew. "For you to tell them they're not ghosts anymore," Riley said. Mara scanned the circle of wide eyes. "No more visitor passes. No more fake crests stitched on black jackets. Just real scars, real dirt, and real trust that no barcode could forge." She stepped up on the old supply crate, her boots creaking against splintered wood. The projector hummed behind her, the shadows of her parents flickering like old saints. On the canvas, "We buried our dead," she began, voice carrying through the raw dusk. "But we didn't bury who we are. They wanted to break our house by wearing our skins, by crawling through our veins, by turning our trust into a blade we'd turn on each other." She let that sit, heavy as the desert night. No one shifted. No one looked away. "But they forgot something," she said. "A house like this isn't just tunnels and fences. It's you. It's the hands that pulled each other from the breach. It's the voices that called out in the dark and got an answer back." Her eyes flicked to Harris, to Ramirez, to Riley's. Bruised grin. "It's the ghosts you choose to carry, not the ones they made you fear. Droppa, if you've ever stood for someone when they couldn't stand for themselves." In the long hush that followed, the trainees shuffled closer. Some reached for each other's sleeves, some pressed bloody fingers to old scars, like they were counting proof that they still had a pulse. Killian stepped up beside her. He said nothing. He didn't have to. His presence said it all. She wasn't standing this alone anymore. She stepped down, boots hitting the cracked concrete with the finality of a hammer blow. "We rebuild the fence," she said. "Not because it keeps the wolves out, but because it shows them we're still here. Every brick, every bolt, every patch on your sleeve says you are not just a ghost waiting for the next breach." Ramirez's voice, quiet but sure, rose over. The hum of the battered generator. "We're Unit 0. A rumble of voices answered him, low at first, then stronger. "Unit 0. She felt the ghosts slip back into the shadows, not gone but no longer wearing her face. no longer dragging her name behind them like a chain. Later, when the lights sputtered out and the projector flickered into silence, she sat by the perimeter wall, the old visitor pass buried deep under the sand where no one would ever scan it again. Killian crouched beside her, shotgun resting across his knees. "You know they'll test us again," he said. "Not today. Not tomorrow, but they'll come. New wolves, new ghosts." She didn't look away from the starlit ridge. "Let them come." "You really think you'll hold this line forever?" She smiled, just enough for the night to see it. "Not forever. Just long enough for the one standing beside me to build it stronger than I ever could." The compound breathed around them, wounded, scraped raw, but alive. And that was the one thing the wolves had never planned for, a ghost that wouldn't die. A line that learned every time it bled. Tomorrow, the world would spin new lies about Unit Zero, that it had fallen, that it had become something less than human. But inside these walls, every scar was a promise, and the founder would stand until the breach came again. Middle of part 13. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. They said the breach would come again. They said ghosts always come back to finish what they start. But in the deep hush of Unit Zero's battered yard, Mara Sinclair felt the truth settle into her bones, like the last warmth of a fire that refuses to go out. She stood at the edge of the north wall, the dawn's first blade of light cutting across her bruised cheek. The old visitor pass was gone, buried where no scanner would ever read it again. In its place, a fresh crest sat stitched above her heart, the original Unit Zero seal, the one she'd drawn herself all those years ago when this place was just an idea scratched in her father's notebook. Below, the yard buzzed with the quiet confidence of people who'd bled together and come out the other side breathing. Harris checked the new floodlights at the outer fence. Ramirez hunched over the relay console, routing fresh comm signals through patched copper that hummed like veins alive again. Riley stood on her own 2 feet by the triage tent, one arm still in a sling, barking orders at a half-dozen new medics who'd arrived from Echo 7's remains. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Drop a if you've ever rebuilt something so no one could tear it down the same way twice. Killian climbed up the ladder beside her, shotgun balanced across his broad shoulders. "Recon says the ridge is clear," he said. "No heat blooms. No ghost signals. Whatever's left of them, they're licking wounds or burying their own dead." Mara didn't look away from the horizon. "They'll be back. Or new ones will take their place. Doesn't matter. We don't stand because they stop coming. We stand because they do." He chuckled. "So what now, Founder?" She lifted her chin, feeling the grit of the wind tug at her hair. "Now we build the next thing. Not just walls and wires, people. New crews. New drills. We teach them how to see the breach coming before the fence rattles." She watched Harris lead a pair of fresh recruits toward the west barricade, his crooked grin splitting wide when one of them dropped their extra mag in the sand. He didn't scold. He just showed them how to tuck it tighter, how to stand with weight braced, how to breathe. That was the lesson. Not the fight. The stand. Drop if you've ever turned what broke you into something stronger. Later she found Ramirez at the old uplink bunker, soldering a new relay panel with hands that shook only when they weren't busy. "Think they'll ever forgive us?" he asked without looking up. "Who?" She said, "The ones who thought we were gone, who saw the ghost stories, who bought the lie that Unit Zero died before they ever signed up." She crouched, fingers brushing the scorch. Marks still burned into the console from the first breach. "They don't have to forgive us. They just have to see us stand." Ramirez barked a short, tired laugh. "I can live with that." The last of the day's heat bled away as she stood at the perimeter once more, Harris at her side, Riley's hoarse voice drifting up from the mess tent where she told the new medics how they'd pulled each other out of the tunnels. half-breath from dying but never letting go. This was the last lesson. You don't hold the line because you're the strongest. You hold it because the one beside you does. And they hold it because you do. She closed her eyes, seeing her father's steady hands on her shoulder, the first time he taught her to breathe through a sniper's scope. Her mother's calm voice guiding her through the dark, telling her that every wound you patched was proof you stayed, you stood, you didn't flinch. A breach is just an invitation, she thought. An invitation to see what you're made of. And Unit 0, they'd answered. The last campfire burned low. Trainees drifted to their cots. The perimeter watched whispering jokes through cracked lips that had bled raw shouting coordinates into the dark. Harris dozed with his back against the same sandbag wall they'd defended just days before. Ramirez snored in the cum shack, headset still around his neck. Mara Sinclair sat at the top of the old watchtower, the desert wind cutting clean through. Her sleeves, the tattered flag above her whipping like a heartbeat that refused to stop. In the distance, the dunes slept. For now, when the next wolves came, and they would, they'd find more than the myths they'd tried to shred apart. They'd find her, and they'd find Unit 0. Droppa. If you've ever learned that no breach is the end of your story. 2. More great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.